"Ma'am, are you the wife of one of our baggage handlers?" That's what she was asked, out loud, in front of a full cabin of first-class passengers, while seated in the very spot she had paid for. No whisper, no hesitation, just a cold assumption, delivered with professional polish and unapologetic audacity. The cabin went quiet, but not from shock. Most of them agreed. A black woman, alone, with no designer labels, no diamond watch, no obvious reason to be in 2A. Of course, she had to be someone's wife. Someone's plus one. Someone who didn't earn the seat she occupied. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply looked at the man in the tailored uniform, the one who asked the question, and smiled. That was the beginning of the end, though no one knew it yet. Because what they didn't realize was that the woman they'd just humiliated in front of the entire plane was the one person who held their future in her hands. Think you know how this ends? You don't. Where are you watching from right now? Comment below. And tell us, at what moment would you have stood up for her? Don't forget to like this video if it stopped you scrolling, and subscribe for more stories where justice doesn't just arrive, it lands hard. Stay with us. This story only gets louder. The hum of the airport intercom echoed gently across the marble halls of Terminal A as Maya Langston adjusted the strap of her leather carry-on and took one last glance at her boarding pass. First class, seat 2A. She moved with the kind of grace that came not from arrogance, but from decades of quiet strength, earned respect, and unshakable resilience. Dressed in a cream blazer over a charcoal blouse and slacks, her look was understated but unmistakably elegant. Still, she had learned long ago that dignity often needed to defend itself in silence. As she approached the gate, the first-class boarding group was being called. The gate agent barely glanced up when scanning her ticket, only offering a perfunctory nod. No welcome aboard, no smile. Maya gave a small nod in return, used to these slights, her footsteps steady as she made her way onto the jet bridge. Inside the cabin, cool ambient lighting and the scent of lavender-infused leather welcomed her. The first-class section gleamed with brushed gold accents and pristine white upholstery. The seats were angled for privacy, and attendants floated from row to row, smiling brightly and chatting warmly with passengers already seated. A middle-aged man in a tailored navy suit was offered champagne with a wink. A young couple were helped with their coats by two attendants who laughed along with their small talk. But as Maya reached her row, a different silence settled over the space. The flight attendant nearest to her, tall, composed, her hair twisted into a sleek blonde bun, paused her chat with another passenger to glance at Maya. She didn't smile. She didn't ask if Maya needed help. Instead, she stepped back half a pace, placing a hot towel on Maya's seat tray with 2 fingers and a stiff wrist, like she was setting down a receipt. Then she turned, without a word. Maya, unfazed on the surface, simply took her seat and began arranging her things. She didn't need the towel. She needed respect. Across the aisle, an older white gentleman glanced her way, then back at his newspaper. Moments later, a flight attendant approached him cheerfully, offering him a choice between still or sparkling water. She bent slightly as she addressed him by name. "Mr. Whitaker, would you like anything while we wait for takeoff?" Before flashing a bright grin, the attendant passed Maya without stopping, carrying the tray forward. Maya didn't look up. She reached for her tablet, pretending to read through her notes. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The rest of the first-class passengers were being doted on, small talk, blanket requests, welcome drinks. The same flight attendant passed Maya's row again, glanced down, and kept moving. No eye contact. Not even the usual safety card spiel. It wasn't what was said that stung. It was what wasn't. She was made invisible, excluded without words, judged without inquiry. A few rows ahead, a man leaned across the aisle and whispered, not bothering to lower his voice much. "I've seen company staff use these seats before. Maintenance crews sometimes hitch a ride up front." The woman beside him chuckled. "Really? I thought that was just an airport myth." He shrugged. "You never know." Maya, ears trained by years of boardrooms and briefings, caught every word. She didn't react. Not with her eyes. Not with her hands. only a quiet exhale from her nose as she returned her gaze to the clouds outside the window. Her ticket lay on the tray table beside her, perfectly visible. First class Langston, M. She hadn't come here to prove a point. She had come to fly home. But the flight, she realized, had already taken off, in judgment. Across from her, a younger woman with sleek black hair and designer heels clutched a Dior tote and eyed Maya with a mixture of curiosity and quiet skepticism, like someone trying to solve a riddle they weren't sure they were allowed to understand. And yet, Maya sat calm, unmoved. She had faced far worse storms than the chill of a snub glance. This wasn't new. It was just disappointing. Soon, the captain's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Skylark Flight 314 to New York. We'll begin our pushback shortly. Please ensure your seatbacks are upright." As the cabin settled into silence, the blonde flight attendant finally returned to Maya's row. She didn't kneel. She didn't smile. She only spoke, her voice clipped and professional. "Can I get you something to drink?" Maya glanced up, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Just water," she said evenly. The attendant nodded once and walked away, heels clicking, like the request was an inconvenience. Maya didn't watch her go. Instead, she looked out the window once more, beyond the wing, toward the rising sun. It always rose, quietly, dependably, no matter how long the night. She smiled faintly to herself, a thought echoing through her. They have no idea who I am. And perhaps that's the point. The aircraft had begun taxiing slowly along the tarmac as Maya sat in silence, the condensation on the window blurring the streaks of sunrise outside. The gentle hum of the engines and low murmurs of conversation created a lull in the cabin that almost disguised the growing tension near her seat. Almost. The blonde flight attendant, the same one who had offered drinks selectively during boarding, returned with a tray balanced effortlessly on one hand. She stopped just short of Maya's row and looked down with the same professional detachment she had worn earlier. "Water," Maya said simply, her voice calm. The attendant's brow furrowed faintly, as if she hadn't expected the request. Her lips pressed together in a polite line that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Are you getting this for someone else? Will the main passenger be joining us shortly?" The words dropped like stones into the still air. Maya looked at her directly, her eyes narrowing just slightly, not with anger, but with disappointment so subtle it could cut. "No," she replied evenly. "I'm the main passenger. Seat 2A." The attendant gave a tight smile, then nodded with a clipped, "Very well," before turning sharply and walking off again. The tray of drinks remained untouched in her hands. From 2 rows ahead, a sharp voice pierced the moment. "Maybe she's the girlfriend of one of the pilots," said a well-dressed woman with platinum hair twisted into a French knot, her voice loud enough for the nearby rows to hear. "They sometimes let staff guests sit up here, don't they?" She turned in her seat to look back at Maya, eyebrows raised in theatrical curiosity. Her companion, a man with thick glasses and a designer scarf, chuckled softly, as if the comment were clever. Maya didn't respond. She refused to offer fuel for a fire built entirely on their own assumptions. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if waiting for some confirmation, then faced forward with a satisfied smirk. The whispers started to multiply. Someone leaned sideways to get a better look at Maya. A man in the aisle seat across from her began typing something into his phone while glancing in her direction. A few rows behind, a woman whispered too loudly to her teenage son, maybe she won some sweepstakes ticket or something. "Airlines do that sometimes, right?" The boy just shrugged, but kept his eyes on Maya as though trying to decode her mystery. The flight attendant returned at last, setting down a glass of water in front of Maya, her movements careful, almost exaggerated. There was a pause where she seemed to consider saying something more, an apology maybe, or an explanation. But then she turned away again, leaving behind a chill far colder than the water she served. Maya took a small sip, the glass cool in her hand, but it wasn't thirst that occupied her thoughts. It was the sound of quiet disbelief from strangers who believed wealth had a look, a smell, a skin tone. The irony, she thought, was that she designed aircraft interiors sleeker than this one. negotiated billion-dollar aerospace contracts in rooms filled with people far more powerful and polite than anyone in this cabin. But she said nothing. Her silence was both armor and protest. Her mind drifted momentarily to her father, a man who had once repaired airplanes with his bare hands in the dry Arizona sun. He used to say, "Let them look, let them guess. You just keep flying higher." The words steadied her, grounding her in the storm of assumptions that surrounded her like turbulence without warning. The overhead lights dimmed slightly as the captain announced takeoff. Maya buckled her seatbelt and leaned back, folding her hands neatly in her lap. The woman in front of her continued to whisper to her seatmate, throwing glances over her shoulder that were meant to intimidate or interrogate. They bounced off Maya like feathers hitting steel. Still, the discomfort in the cabin wasn't imaginary. It thickened in the air, made heavier by the polite smiles stretched over judgmental minds. As the plane lifted off the ground, rising smoothly into the clouds, Maya felt her own thoughts ascend into a space where restraint lived. This wasn't new. It wasn't even surprising. But it was disappointing every time. Her expression remained calm, her body composed. But inside, she was measuring every word, every look, every moment like data points in a familiar equation. Perception versus truth. The truth was she didn't owe anyone here an explanation. Not about her seat, not about her presence, not about her silence. But the perception, that unspoken, swirling force of prejudice disguised as curiosity or concern, had already marked her. The flight attendants began moving through the aisles again, now offering menus and adjusting headsets. When one passed by Maya again, she paused briefly, as if reconsidering how to address her. "Ma'am, do you have dietary restrictions?" she asked, and this time, her tone held less dismissal, but also less warmth. Maya looked up. "No. I'll have the grilled sea bass, please." The attendant nodded, scribbled a note, and left again. Across the aisle, the man with the phone was now watching her openly, as if still trying to place her in some internal hierarchy he hadn't yet resolved. She could almost hear his inner monologue, too polished for staff, too poised for a tourist, too quiet for someone trying to prove herself. And still, he had no answer. Maya returned to her tablet, opening a file filled with dense financial charts and annotated strategy notes. She didn't need to hide who she was, because no one here would believe it anyway. That was the strange blessing of their ignorance. She could observe freely, knowing they would never expect the woman in seat 2A to be their potential salvation or judgment. As she scrolled through the documents, a message flashed on the screen from her assistant, just one sentence. "Board meeting rescheduled to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Executive team confirmed your arrival." Maya smiled faintly, the first genuine one since she stepped onto the plane. Outside, the clouds broke apart, revealing a soft sun-drenched horizon. Inside, assumptions continued to swirl around her seat like invisible turbulence. The woman in front turned again, this time slowly, casually, as if expecting Maya to finally say something. But Maya simply looked past her, through the aisle, into the long stretch of sky ahead. The cabin lights softened into a warm golden hue as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and trays began to clatter quietly in the galley as flight attendants prepared the first-class dinner service. The hum of conversation returned, subdued but laced with a tension that Maya had become attuned to, an ambient pressure that pulsed just beneath the polished surface of luxury. She glanced down at the menu still untouched on her tray table. Grilled sea bass, filet mignon, artichoke ravioli. The choices were limited but curated, designed to reflect an image of exclusivity. Maya had already made her selection earlier. She remembered clearly the brief exchange. "No, I don't have dietary restrictions." Yes, the sea bass. It should have been straightforward, like it was for everyone else. Yet as the first cart rolled into the cabin, the familiar blonde flight attendant began her rounds with a warmth that once again disappeared the closer she got to Maya's row. 2 passengers across the aisle received their meals with smiles and laughter. The woman in front of Maya turned, whispering something to her companion as she delicately unfolded her linen napkin. The smell of saffron rice and white wine reduction filled the space. Maya glanced up expectantly as the cart neared her, but it never stopped. The attendant pushed past her seat without a glance, continuing to the row behind. Maya frowned, quietly adjusting her posture, unsure whether to speak or wait. The cart returned several minutes later, this time manned by a different attendant, a younger man with dark hair and a neatly pressed uniform. He leaned toward the man sitting beside Maya, a middle-aged gentleman in a tailored brown suit, offering him the menu again just in case he'd change his mind. The man declined, but pointed slightly toward Maya with his thumb. "She's still waiting," he said casually, before turning away. The younger attendant looked surprised. "Oh," he said. "Let me check." He ducked his head slightly, shuffled through a tablet in his hand, then disappeared toward the galley without further explanation. Moments later, the blonde flight attendant returned alone, carrying a tray in one hand. She placed a covered dish in front of the man beside Maya, offered him a crisp smile, then turned to Maya. But instead of placing a tray down, she leaned in with a quiet, practiced voice that barely masked condescension. "I'm sorry, ma'am, the sea base is reserved for signature tier passengers only." Maya's eyes lifted slowly from the menu to meet hers. "Excuse me," she said, not sharply, but with a clarity that cut. The attendant smiled tightly. "Your ticket is first class, but our system shows you haven't been assigned signature tier access. The entree options available for standard first class are more limited. I can offer you the vegetarian ravioli if you'd like." A beat of silence passed between them. Maya's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze made the attendant hesitate. "You took my order earlier," Maya said quietly, "and there was no mention of signature tiers." The attendant offered a short nod, as if dismissing the correction. "We've had some updates. I can double-check the manifest if you prefer, but it may take a while." She didn't wait for a reply before stepping back and vanishing into the galley again. Across the aisle, another passenger looked over briefly, their fork paused halfway to their mouth. The man beside Maya cleared his throat, adjusted his cufflinks, then leaned sideways, murmuring just loudly enough for Maya to hear. "I hate to ask, but do you mind switching seats?" Maya turned her head slightly, unsure if she heard him correctly. "Excuse me," she asked, tone neutral. The man gestured vaguely toward the curtain separating first class from business. "It's just, I have this sinus sensitivity, really strong sense of smell. And, well, I've been picking up something unfamiliar. Nothing personal, just a bit triggering for my allergies." Maya's eyes locked onto him. "You're allergic to what exactly?" she asked, not with sarcasm, but with surgical precision. The man smiled uncomfortably. "It's not a specific substance. It's more environmental, like certain perfumes or, I don't know, maybe residual cleaning agents." He glanced toward the aisle, clearly expecting a flight attendant to swoop in and resolve the situation on his behalf. No one did. Maya didn't respond. She turned her eyes forward, folded her napkin, and placed it calmly in her lap. The silence that followed was heavier than anything spoken. The man shifted in his seat, tapping his fingers against the armrest. When no one came to move her, or him, he exhaled audibly, muttering under his breath. "I should have taken the earlier flight." 10 minutes passed, then 15. Carts moved up and down the aisle, delivering wine, dessert menus, and coffee, but Maya remained trailless. The ravioli never arrived. No apology was offered. Her menu sat folded on the tray table, pristine and untouched. The seat beside her felt colder now, not because of temperature, but because of presence, how quickly it could change from a person into a barrier. As the lights dimmed further for post-dinner rest, passengers reclined their seats, donned silk masks, and slid into a world of wine-induced sleep. Maya sat upright, hands resting on her lap, posture undisturbed. She had become the only one awake in a cabin designed for comfort, yet now soaked in discomfort of a different kind. The hum of the engines grew louder in her ears, not because they changed, but because everything else had gone still. She breathed slowly, deliberately, feeling the way isolation settled around her, not sharp but steady, not obvious but intentional. She was being unserved, unseated, unwelcome. without anyone saying a single direct word to that effect. And that, she thought bitterly, was the craft of it. That's what made it so hard to fight. Because when they spoke to you, it was always with a smile. When they ignored you, it was always with professionalism. When they moved past you, it was always in the name of procedure. Outside the window, clouds drifted like pale ghosts against a navy sky. Inside, Maya remained still, anchored by an invisible weight pressing down in every direction. She closed her eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to steady her breath. She wasn't tired. She was calculating. Not plotting revenge. Not even justice. Just something deeper. Something colder. Something that had begun to solidify quietly, right there in the soft hum of luxury. The faint chimes signaling meal service completion echoed softly overhead as the cabin settled into a hushed lull. The scent of roast filet and garlic cream sauce lingered in the recycled air, wrapping itself around half-sipped wine glasses and trays being cleared away with careful hands. Maya sat quietly, posture unmoved, her tray table still conspicuously empty, while the man beside her had slipped into a half-doze, arms crossed and earbuds in. Around her, first-class passengers nestled into their reclined seats, eyes shaded by silk masks or scrolling silently on sleek tablets. It was the moment when the world inside a plane usually paused, detached from time, floating somewhere between departure and destination. But for Maya, the stillness only sharpened the edge of everything left unspoken. Then came the sound of approaching footsteps, heels clicking with measured precision against the cabin floor. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant. It was deliberate. The kind of gait that belonged to someone used to delivering decisions and expecting them to be accepted. Maya didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air shifted slightly as the figure stopped beside her row. Trish Harding, the lead flight attendant, known among crew members for her fastidiousness and her practiced blend of charm and control, leaned in just enough for discretion, but far enough to make her presence felt. She lowered her voice in the manner of someone offering guidance, not instruction, but the weight of her words betrayed something else entirely. "Ms." She paused, glancing at the name printed on the edge of Maya's tablet screen. "Langston. I wanted to speak with you privately for just a moment." Maya looked up calmly, not shifting her posture. "Yes." Trish smiled tightly. "I don't mean to cause any discomfort, but this section of the cabin maintains a certain standard of experience. Some guests feel it's important to preserve that." Maya blinked once. "I see," she replied, her tone unreadable. Trish continued, choosing each word as though they were part of a carefully rehearsed play. "We occasionally encounter situations where seating assignments, well, they don't align with the guest's expectations, or the experience doesn't feel quite appropriate." Maya tilted her head slightly, just enough to show she was listening, but not yielding. "Are you suggesting I'm in the wrong seat?" she asked. Trish hesitated, lips pressing together in a subtle smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Not necessarily," she said smoothly. "Only that perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the back. Sometimes the environment there is a little more flexible, less rigid, less expectation-driven." She let that hang in the air, as if Maya was supposed to fill in the meaning herself. Maya didn't blink, didn't react, didn't give Trish the satisfaction of confusion or offense. Instead, she reached slowly into the side pocket of her leather bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and held it up between two fingers. The paper was crisp, clean, undeniably clear. First Class 2A. Trish glanced at it, her smile never fading. But her next words came so smoothly, so effortlessly cruel. They sliced through the air like the flick of a whip. "Yes, of course," she said, then leaned closer and added in a voice coated with silk and steel, "I've seen that before. Sometimes the airline gives away promotional seats. We've had a few sweepstakes winners over the years who think they're full-status guests. But you'd be surprised how often they're confused about what that really means." For a fraction of a second, the entire world went silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to dull as Maya processed the weight of the insult, disguised as policy, dipped in fake courtesy, and delivered with a smile. She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. She didn't react. Instead, she lowered the boarding pass to her lap, folded it slowly, and slid it back into her bag. "I assure you," she said, voice clear but soft, "there's no confusion here." Trish nodded slowly, as if placating a child who still insisted they were right. "Of course," she murmured, straightening her posture. "I just thought I'd offer the option, in case you fell out of place." Maya didn't break eye contact. "I don't," she replied. Trish's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The moment hung there taut and cold, before she gave a shallow nod and turned to walk away, her heels clicking against the floor again like a metronome of dismissal. But the damage was done. The words had landed. And not just with Maya. A few rows back, someone had looked up at the sound of Trish's voice. A man across the aisle pretended to scroll through his phone, but didn't blink as his eyes shifted sideways toward Maya's seat. Even silence could become complicit. Even quiet glances could shout judgment. Maya sat still, hands folded neatly, staring at the empty tray table in front of her. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She could feel it, how quickly a cabin could become a courtroom. Not through accusations, but through absence of empathy, of fairness, of truth. In the galley, Trish met the gaze of another attendant and gave a short nod. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The script had been followed. The message delivered. Maya, however, didn't move. Her spine remained straight. Her eyes returned to the window. Outside, the sky was blackening into a soft indigo dusk, scattered with distant stars too far away to care about human pettiness. Her thoughts drifted not toward revenge, but to memory, to every boardroom where her ideas were dismissed until echoed by someone else, to every contract where her name raised eyebrows until the dollar signs forced them to lower, to every smile that hit a sting. And now, at 35,000 feet, it was happening again. Only this time, there were no negotiations, no stakeholders, no cameras. Just a seat, a silence, and a message that echoed louder than any intercom. "You don't belong here." Except she did. More than anyone else on that plane, perhaps. But they wouldn't understand that. Not yet. The cabin had shifted into its evening rhythm, a quiet pulse of dimmed lights and muted voices, where passengers either drifted into the lull of sleep or distracted themselves with movies and devices glowing faintly under their screens. Maya remained upright in her seat, her posture dignified but firm, as though anchoring herself against a current she refused to drift with. Trish hadn't returned, but the atmosphere she left behind lingered like the aftershock of a well-aimed slap, one not felt physically but emotionally, in the way eyes began to slide past her more often, the way whispers took on a new frequency. It was subtle but suffocating, like trying to breathe through gauze. The crew moved with fluid efficiency, collecting empty wine glasses and refilling others with smiles that somehow still skipped over Maya's seat like she wasn't quite there, or perhaps too there. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence stretch. It didn't help. Not when behind her, near the galley curtain, laughter broke out. Two flight attendants stood just beyond the fold of soft beige fabric, their voices hushed only in volume, but not in meaning. "She's still in 2A, one of them, young brunette, with a pinched laugh, asked between chuckles. "Still, like she owns the place." Her colleague, a blonde junior attendant named Kylie, responded with a grin that was audible even through the thin barrier of sound. "Maybe she thinks this is uber black," she quipped, snorting softly. "Miss, drop me off in first class, will ya?" The two burst into quiet laughter. The kind that didn't care who heard because they were sure the joke wouldn't reach the person targeted, or wouldn't matter if it did. Maya opened her eyes, hearing every syllable, her ears too practiced not to catch nuance even when wrapped in mockery. Her face remained composed, but inside, something cold twisted and coiled, like steel wire tightening around resolve. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The silence she gave them in return was more pointed than any retort. She simply sat straighter. Minutes later, a new voice emerged from the row just behind hers. A man, jovial in tone and clearly comfortable in the space around him, waved down a passing attendant and asked with a smile, "So, do we get any extras tonight? A little something for us loyal flyers." His voice carried warmth, but the kind that expected to be rewarded. The flight attendant paused, gave him a bright grin, and said in a chipper tone, "We do, actually," then leaned slightly closer as though sharing an inside joke. "But only for passengers who look the part." She winked, glanced subtly toward Maya's direction, and continued down the aisle without waiting for a response. The man laughed, oblivious or perhaps complicit, and returned to scrolling through his phone, the corner of his mouth still lifted in a smirk. Maya sat motionless. Every instinct in her body told her to let it go, to hold fast, to absorb and move forward, like she always had. But something about the moment, the casual tone, the dismissiveness, the laugh track that had become the soundtrack to her flight, gnawed deeper than usual. Not because it was new, but because it was shameless. Because they didn't even try to hide it now. It wasn't prejudice in whispers or glances anymore. It was entertainment. A shared performance of exclusion, packaged as humor, meant to be just light enough to dismiss and just sharp enough to wound. Around her, no one said anything. No passenger interrupted. No one leaned over to say, "That's not okay." Because for them, it wasn't happening. Or it was. And they just didn't care. Her seat, though physically cushioned and well-designed, had become an island, a spotlighted space where every smile passed by like a skip stone. She adjusted the cuff of her blouse, finger steady, breath measured, her face unreadable. In the galley, the two attendants finished their quiet laugh and returned to service, their expressions once again coated in that familiar veneer of courtesy. Kylie passed Maya again, this time checking on the man across the aisle who had asked for dessert. "Chocolate tart or sorbet, Mr. Halpern?" she asked sweetly. He smiled and requested both, to which she giggled and said, "For you, anything." She turned without a glance at Maya and walked away, her tray half full, her awareness surgically selective. Maya could feel the pattern, now, the choreography of it. A dance that wove around her seat, pausing long enough to be seen, but never long enough to acknowledge. She wasn't invisible. She was deliberately framed out, like a subject cropped from a photograph, because she didn't match the aesthetic. A few moments later, another attendant leaned in toward a couple in the front row and offered them each a rolled towel scented with eucalyptus, whispering that it was a little luxury for our most loyal flyers. Maya didn't receive one. Neither did a man several rows back who looked just as confused but chose not to question it. Maya said nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was recording, storing, weighing. Not everything needed to be responded to immediately. Sometimes, the most powerful rebuttal wasn't a word. It was a wait, a pause, the moment before something changed. She shifted in her seat, reaching into her bag again, not for her phone, not for anything performative, but for a small notepad she kept tucked beside her documents. With a simple motion, she opened to a blank page and wrote 2 words. They laughed. Then she closed the notebook, placed it back, and folded her hands again. Outside the window, the clouds had thinned into a gentle haze, the night deepening beyond the glass. The plane sailed smoothly forward, but inside the cabin, the turbulence was real, psychological, atmospheric. It wasn't in the engines, it was in the hierarchy, in the invisible markers of worth that floated between rows, carried not by title or seat number, but by perception. And tonight, Maya was being told in 100 subtle ways that hers did not belong. Except they were wrong. The overhead lights flickered briefly, casting a dim golden glow over the cabin as flight attendants began preparing for the night cycle. Pillows were handed out, cabin temperature adjusted, and ambient music replaced the soft chime of earlier announcements. Passengers settled further into their reclined seats, the hum of luxury humming quietly around them like a lullaby for the elite. But for Maya Langston, seat 2A, the lull had long since been broken. Her eyes remained open, her body perfectly still. The echo of laughter and stinging comments still clung to the air around her, and though no one was laughing now, the absence of cruelty didn't erase its imprint. In the galley near the front, a conversation was taking place, quiet, serious, and pointed in her direction. The young attendant Kylie was speaking in hushed tones with another woman, older, with a tighter bun and a headset clipped discreetly into one ear. The woman's navy blue blazer and sharp posture marked her as someone of higher rank, not cabin crew, but operational authority. She nodded as Kylie spoke, occasionally glancing toward Maya's row. Then, without hesitation, she stepped out and began walking toward her. Maya noticed her immediately, the purposeful stride, the artificial smile. She stopped just beside Maya's seat, leaned down slightly, and said, "Ms. Langston, may I speak with you for a moment?" Her tone was carefully neutral, but it carried the weight of instruction rather than inquiry. Maya nodded slightly. "Of course," she replied, voice smooth. "Is something wrong?" The woman didn't answer directly. "Would you mind stepping off the aircraft for a quick security verification? It's a routine thing, nothing serious. Just a brief check for internal consistency across manifests." Maya blinked once. "Excuse me." The woman gestured toward the front of the cabin, where the jet bridge was still connected though sealed. "Just a quick off-boarding for supplemental verification. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes." Maya straightened. "And why, specifically, am I being asked to disembark?" The woman's professional expression faltered just a fraction before recovering. "Well, during visual scan protocols, a discrepancy was noted regarding attire and passenger classification. Some concerns arose," she paused, recalibrating her phrasing, "regarding identification consistency. For example, most of our signature first passengers typically wear boarding badges, watches, or credentials that sync with our digital scans. Your profile visually didn't align with that pattern." Maya felt her chest tighten, not with panic, but with a kind of rising pressure that comes from being told, for the 100th time, that your presence alone is suspicious. "So I'm being asked to leave my seat because I'm not wearing a Rolex?" she asked flatly. The woman hesitated. "Not at all. We're simply following a protocol." "Then may I ask if the gentleman in 3D, who also isn't wearing a watch or badge, was flagged for the same verification?" Maya's tone was icy, polite. The woman's mouth opened, but no words came. Behind her, a few passengers had begun to look up, sensing tension, though not understanding it. "Ms. Langston," the woman began again, "it will only take a moment. We'll reseat you promptly." "No," Maya said quietly but firmly. "If this is a formal request to vacate my seat for security reasons, I'd like to speak with your operations lead before I comply." The woman hesitated, nodded once, and retreated toward the galley. Moments later, a man in a slim-fitting gray suit entered the cabin. He was in his mid-40s, with slick back hair and a badge clipped prominently to his jacket that read Senior Flight Operations Manager. He approached with confident strides and stopped directly beside Maya. "Good evening," he said with a rehearsed smile. "I'm Philip Rayner, with Flight Operations. May I have a moment of your time?" Maya looked up, silent. "Certainly," she said. Philip glanced around, then crouched slightly to speak at eye level, though his voice remained audible to those nearby. "There's been a bit of confusion," he said. "We had a crew report that there might have been a miscommunication regarding your placement in this cabin. I was hoping you could clarify something for us quickly." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Clarify what exactly?" Philip gave a short chuckle, as though embarrassed by the request. "We're trying to confirm if perhaps you're accompanying someone, maybe a spouse or family member, who works with one of our support teams. In the cargo division, for instance. We've had cases in the past where family members are escorted up front, and it just helps to keep our logs accurate." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of an overhead fan. Then Maya inhaled slowly, deliberately, as if preparing her words like a scalpel. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, voice low and sharp. "You're asking if I'm in first class because I'm someone's wife or cousin who works in cargo?" Philip nodded without hesitation. "It's just a quick clarification," he repeated. "Standard when something seems unexpected." Maya tilted her head, eyes narrowing into slits of steel. "And what exactly about me seems unexpected to you, Mr. Rayner?" Philip held her gaze for a moment too long, realizing too late that there was no clean way to answer. Maya sat back slowly in her seat, folding her arms. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "And if this plane intends to remove me, you will have to explain it to more people than just me." Philip stood up, his professional facade cracking at the edges. "There's no need to escalate," he said quickly, holding up a hand. "We just wanted to be thorough." "You've been thorough," Maya replied. "Now go be thorough somewhere else." He lingered for a second, then turned away without another word. As he walked back toward the cockpit, a quiet hush fell over the cabin again, thicker this time, uncomfortable, like everyone had heard but no one wanted to admit it. In her seat, Maya didn't move. She had not raised her voice, had not stood up, had not called anyone out by name. But the weight of her resistance radiated outward like gravity, shifting the air around her. Across the aisle, a woman adjusted her scarf and looked away. In the row ahead, the platinum-haired passenger who had once speculated about Maya's staff connection didn't turn around this time. She didn't dare. The wheels of the aircraft touched down with a subtle jolt, skimming the runway like the soft drag of a silk ribbon across glass. A ripple of awareness spread through the cabin as window shades were drawn back and tray tables clicked into place. The voice of the captain, calm and casual, floated over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Local time is 7:26 p.m. Skies are clear, and we'll be arriving at Gate 19. For those connecting onward, please check with our staff at the terminal. We appreciate you flying with us and hope you had a comfortable journey." Passengers around Maya began to stir, stretching stiff limbs, gathering headphones and briefcases, and returning to polite small talk as if the last 4 hours had been nothing but ordinary. But for Maya Langston, everything about this flight had been extraordinary, for all the wrong reasons. She didn't move. She sat upright, composed, her hands resting on her bag. Her face betrayed nothing, but her silence was no longer passive, it was poised. Outside, the ground crew approached the aircraft with practice speed, aligning stair units and prepping the gate. But this time, they weren't alone. Parked discreetly near the base of the mobile stairs was a sleek black executive vehicle, engine still humming. Around it stood a small group of individuals in dark suits, their postures upright, their expressions unreadable. They wore subtle earpieces and bore the sharp look of corporate precision. A tall man stepped forward from the group, adjusting the cuffs of his charcoal overcoat, glancing up at the cabin door that had just clicked open with a mechanical sigh. The cabin crew unlatched the lever and drew the door aside. Cold night air spilled into the entryway as the staircase was secured to the aircraft's frame. Inside, Kylie was first to move, preparing to usher first-class passengers off in the usual hierarchy of aisle first protocol. But before she could lift the curtain, a quiet beep in her earpiece made her pause. She pressed it once, then listened. Her eyes widened slightly as the message finished. Then she turned, walking quickly to the lead attendant, Trish, and whispered something urgent. Trish's head snapped toward the door, then back toward Maya. Her expression shifted, barely perceptible, but unmistakable to those watching closely. A hesitation, a recalculation. Still, she said nothing. A soft knock on the fuselage came next, followed by a voice from outside, formal but warm. "Cabin clearance for Dr. Langston, please." That was the moment the cabin cracked. The passengers nearest the front turned first, glancing toward the aisle, then toward Maya. Some blinked, confused. Others frowned, uncertain if they had heard correctly. Maya rose slowly from her seat, rolling her shoulders back with fluid grace. She stepped into the aisle with the same calm stride she had used to board, except now the current had reversed. Every eye turned to her, not with suspicion, but with dawning realization. At the top of the staircase, the tall man in the overcoat stood with hands clasped in front of him. As Maya descended, he inclined his head, speaking clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "Welcome back to New York, Dr. Langston. On behalf of the Global Aeronautics Council, it's an honor to have you." Behind him, the rest of the group bowed their heads in unison. Executives, advisors, and aides all gathered not for some visiting politician or celebrity, but for the woman who had just spent 4 hours being questioned, humiliated, and dismissed by a team who now stood frozen in the cabin doorway. Maya offered the man a soft nod and a handshake, her posture unreadable. Inside the cabin, Trish stood half a step back from the curtain, her mouth slightly parted, eyes darting toward the cockpit as if seeking instruction. Kylie, pale now, remained still. The passengers said nothing, but their faces flickered with recognition of the hierarchy they thought they understood being rewritten before their eyes. Some looked embarrassed, others simply stunned. A few looked at the floor, unable to hold her gaze as she walked past. At the base of the stairs, the executive team stepped aside to let Maya pass. As she neared the car, the rear door opened, and a sharply dressed woman with a leather portfolio stepped out. "We've finalized the revised terms for the stabilization package," she said briskly. "The board is ready for your signal." Maya nodded once. "We'll move forward." She turned slightly, giving one last glance toward the plane, and canceled the original site inspection for next week. "I've already seen what I needed to." The assistant understood instantly. Understood. That terminal contract, they're no longer in consideration. Maya replied, "Not for this phase. Let them sit a while." She stepped into the car, the door closing behind her with a muffled click. Inside the aircraft, confusion churned beneath the surface. A businessman leaned toward his seatmate. "Did she say Global Aeronautics Council?" The woman beside him nodded numbly. "And Dr. Langston." In the galley, one of the junior attendants finally whispered the full name. She's that Maya Langston? As in Langston Technologies. As in the aerospace endowment? As in the woman who's pledging $100 million in post-crisis rescue funding? As in the one the whole airline's been courting for 6 months? The pieces fell into place like dominoes pushed too late. Every glance, every slight, every smirk had been built on the false foundation of assumption. And now it cracked wide open. On the tarmac, the car pulled away in silence. Inside, Maya looked out the tinted window, watching the aircraft shrink behind her. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But somewhere beneath her stillness, something final had shifted. The executive sedan slid through the restricted terminal gate and disappeared down the tarmac access road. But the tremor Maya Langston had left behind was still very much present. By the time the aircraft was fully deboard, whispers had turned to phone calls, and phone calls to silent panic. Inside the corporate wing of Skylux headquarters, just beyond Gate 3 in the private terminal annex, a conference room had been prepared in haste. The CEO of the airline, Gregory Halston, had received a direct request within minutes of touchdown. Private meeting. Immediate. Dr. Maya Langston. All crew involved. No exceptions. No one dared question it. By the time Maya entered the glass-walled boardroom, Halston was already waiting, flanked by his legal advisor, the VP of Customer Relations, and a stunned HR director flipping nervously through a personnel dossier. A pot of untouched coffee sat cooling on the end of a long table, its steam long forgotten. The room was hushed, sterile, air-conditioned to the point of discomfort. Maya stepped in without a word, her presence as silent and sharp as a scalpel. She removed her coat, placed it gently over the back of a chair, and sat without asking. Her assistant stood at the door, tablet in hand, eyes scanning the group like an auditor's apprentice. Within 3 minutes, the flight attendants and onboard staff from Flight 314 were ushered into the room. They entered one by one, confusion and quiet dread painted on their faces. Kylie arrived first, eyes darting, clutching the hem of her jacket. Trish followed, her composure brittle, her movements mechanical. Even Philip Rayner, the operations manager who had suggested Maya was related to a baggage handler, filed in, paler than anyone had ever seen him. They took their seats, avoiding eye contact, trying not to breathe too loudly. Maya allowed the silence to settle, like dust before speaking. "Let's be clear," she began, voice soft but unignorable. "This isn't a performance review. This isn't a grievance hearing. This is clarity." She opened a leather folder and slid out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. "On this page," she said, "is the current draft of the $100 million aviation stabilization package from the Global Aeronautics Council. The package your company desperately needs to avoid filing for structured insolvency." The words hit the table like a gavel. Gregory Halston shifted in his seat, his mouth forming a tight line. Maya didn't look at him. Her eyes swept the crew. I boarded flight 314 with no security entourage, no VIP markings, no pre-alert. That was intentional. I wanted to see how your company's culture behaves without the varnish of title. I wanted to understand what kind of professionalism you show when you think no one important is watching. She paused, then pulled a second document from the folder and laid it face up on the table. It was a flight manifest, passenger list, crew assignments, annotated in Maya's handwriting. Let's begin with Kylie, she said, voice clinical. Junior attendant, employed 16 months. 3 documented performance complaints in her file. 1 related to discriminatory behavior involving a passenger of Middle Eastern descent. Deferred without action. Kylie's mouth dropped open slightly. Trish Harding, Maya continued, without turning her head. Lead attendant, 12 years. 2 diversity training sessions missed. 1 internal complaint filed by a fellow crew member regarding inappropriate jokes made in the galley. Closed for lack of evidence. Trish's hands tightened in her lap. Philip Rayner, Maya said, tone even flatter now, operations manager. For managerial write-ups. 1 for inappropriate vetting of passengers during a domestic executive flight. 1 for derogatory language used about staff contractors. And 2 complaints related to verbal assumptions regarding passenger status based on appearance. All dismissed. Philip looked down at his shoes, lips pressed so tightly together they'd gone white. Maya's gaze swept across the table. What concerns me isn't just your behavior, she said, fingers gently tapping the table. It's the consistency of it, the systemic nature of it. It's not about one bad day. It's about a culture that doesn't see certain people until those people hold the pen over a check that could save your careers. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. I was asked if I was getting water for someone else. I was told I didn't look like a VIP. I was told I didn't fit the cabin. I was laughed at behind a curtain, denied the meal I ordered, and finally asked if I was a spouse of someone in cargo. This is not misunderstanding. This is rot. And now, she turned slightly toward Halston, you're all discovering that the person you ignored, dismissed, and insulted controls the one document that decides whether your airline survives this quarter. The room was silent. No one breathed. Maya leaned back slowly in her chair. This isn't about ego, she said. I didn't come here to be bowed to. I came to see if this company was ready to be part of the future of aviation, or if it was still chained to the thinking of a last century. She reached into her folder and pulled out one final document. Review clause from the funding agreement. She laid it gently on the table and tapped it once. Section 7C of the funding agreement allows the board to prioritize partners that demonstrate not only fiscal need, but ethical alignment. That clause is mine. I wrote it. No one at the table looked up. Trish stared at the water bottle in front of her like it might vanish. Kylie's eyes glistened with something dangerously close to regret, but she kept her mouth shut. Philip's jaw flexed, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Even Halston had gone quiet, the earlier corporate polish stripped from his features. He opened his mouth to speak, but Maya lifted one hand. Not yet, she said. I'm not finished. The following morning, the corporate tower of Skylux Airlines stood against the gray skyline like a monument to modern aviation, sleek, tall, and efficient in appearance, but now trembling quietly beneath the weight of an internal reckoning. By 8 a.m., internal memos had circulated to senior leadership marked, high priority execution immediate. Maya Langston had left the building hours ago without raising her voice or making threats. She didn't need to. Her words had already triggered a cascade of reassignments, reviews, and revocations, each one cold, precise, and irreversible. Inside the Human Resources Division, Trish Harding sat in a glass-walled office, hands folded tightly in her lap, facing a director who didn't meet her eyes as he read the letter aloud. Effective immediately, you are hereby reassigned to the Ground Operations and Inventory Management Division, he said, the words clipped and final. Duration of reassignment, 6 months. During this period, you will not engage in any form of customer-facing service, nor be scheduled on any flights. You will report daily to Terminal 4 for logistics rotation under direct supervision. Trish didn't speak. She had known this was coming, even before the meeting ended. It wasn't the demotion that stung the most, it was the title. Hogan. It screamed irrelevance. The glamorous world of premium cabin service had been ripped away, and in its place stood a cold warehouse lit by fluorescent bulbs and lined with crates of airline headsets and folding carts. She'd once been a mentor to new crew members, praised in training manuals. Now she would be scanning barcode sheets and signing off on linen delivery counts. She had no one to blame but herself, and she knew it. "You're still employed," the HR director added, almost gently, as if offering a consolation prize. This was Ms. Langston's request. She didn't push for termination. Trish looked up briefly, her voice rasping out the only words she could muster. "She gave me a chance." The director nodded. "You should use it." Elsewhere, at Skylux's loyalty management department, a different kind of fallout was underway. In a quiet corner office filled with branded folders and tier-level charts, a small team worked through a prepared list of names flagged in red. Each one was cross-referenced against a video-free incident log of Flight 314. They had all been documented. Those who rolled their eyes, those who laughed, and those who whispered venom just loud enough to be heard. A refined older woman, Mrs. Natalie Crestwell, who had openly speculated whether Maya was a sweepstakes guest. Mr. Douglas Harper, the man who had asked if staff girlfriends now sat in premium cabins. Both had been recorded in internal crew logs, their behavior verified by 3 written testimonies, and an anonymous complaint filed by a first officer post-flight. Within hours, personalized letters bearing the Skylux crest were dispatched to their primary email accounts, followed by hard copies via certified courier. The content was brief, sterile, and impossible to misinterpret. Effective immediately, Skylux Airlines has reviewed your customer conduct during a recent flight and determined a violation of our passenger standards and dignity policy. As a result, your premium tier status has been revoked in full. You will no longer be eligible for any loyalty upgrades, lounge access, or preferred booking privileges across our global network. This decision is final and not subject to appeal. The responses varied. Mrs. Crestwell called customer service within 20 minutes of receiving her letter, demanding to speak to someone above an agent, only to be told politely but firmly that no exceptions would be made. Mr. Harper emailed 3 executives within the hour, all of whom redirected him to the original message with no further comment. Inside their homes, these individuals sat staring at a printed page that no longer saw them as valued frequent flyers, but as liabilities, reminders that money didn't shield arrogance from accountability. For the first time, they were experiencing what it meant to lose status, not because of a missed payment, but because of missed character. They had spoken carelessly, laughed confidently, and dismissed a fellow passenger based on appearance alone. Now, the silence from the airline spoke louder than any rebuttal they could write. Even outside the internal corridors of the company, word began to travel quietly among those who mattered. Skylux's executive team, still in damage control, chose to issue no public statement. Instead, they let the message spread through policy. Reputation is a living thing, and sometimes the best response is action that leaves no room for denial. Meanwhile, Gregory Halston, the CEO who had sat across from Maya less than 12 hours earlier, called an emergency alignment meeting with his board. The stabilization package was still pending, its signature line untouched, and everyone in the room knew that Maya Langston held the pen. But even if she signed it tomorrow, the real change had already begun. It wasn't in numbers, it was in the air. In the way every policy was now reviewed for bias triggers, in the way every employee handbook was being rewritten line by line, and in the way every crew assignment was quietly rerouted to prioritize diversity-compliant matches until further notice. At Terminal 4's cold back loading dock, Trish clocked in at 6:58 a.m. the next morning, wearing a reflective vest over her blazer. She scanned shipment codes into a handheld device and tried not to meet the eyes of ramp agents who once joked with her in the first-class galley. Kylie had been reassigned to midday coach flights with mentorship probation, her seniority reset, her privileges suspended. Neither of them said much to anyone. There were no more jokes, no more glances, no more uber-black comments, just silence, and the echo of Maya Langston's measured words playing in the back of their minds like a mantra they didn't want, but now had no choice but to remember. It had been 3 weeks since the now infamous Flight 314, but inside the quiet auditorium of the Skylux Leadership Development Center, echoes of that flight still lingered like residue on polished glass. The space was warm and open, sunlight pouring through the tall windows that lined the western wall, casting long shadows across rows of minimalist chairs and a single podium placed at the front. The name engraved on the metal plaque beside the entryway read, "The Langston Initiative for Equity in Aviation," and beneath it, the subtitle, "A Program for Rebuilding Integrity from the Inside Out." The room was filled with company staff, some junior, some veteran, all hand-selected. This was not a mandatory course. It was invitation only, but only for those who had specifically requested to participate. Among them, seated near the front, was someone few expected to see, Kylie. Her uniform today was stripped of its previous glamour. No scarf, no badge, no polished gold stripes. She wore a simple navy blouse, notebook in hand, expression unreadable. She hadn't spoken much since her reassignment, but something in her had shifted. When the application forms for the Langston Initiative quietly opened to internal candidates, she didn't hesitate. She wrote a 3-line message to the Internal Review Board. "I was wrong. I didn't understand the harm I caused. I want to start again." That was all. 2 days later, she received a 1-line response. "Orientation begins Monday. Be early." And she was. The room gradually filled with others, a technician from maintenance, a gate supervisor from Miami, a customer service manager from Chicago. But Kylie's gaze remained fixed on the podium, the tension in her shoulders unmoving. Then, exactly at 9 a.m., the back door opened, and Maya Langston entered. She wore slate gray slacks, a white blouse, and a soft charcoal blazer, simple, understated, confident. She didn't carry papers. She didn't need slides. Her presence, as always, was enough. Conversations faded. Every head turned. She walked to the podium with calm, purposeful steps and took a moment to scan the room. When she spoke, her voice was the same quiet steel that had once sliced through a boardroom of executives. "Welcome," she began, "and thank you for choosing to be here." Her eyes met Kylie's for a brief second. Not an accusation, but an invitation. This is not a punishment. This is a place for people who want to be more than the titles on their name tags. You're here because you saw something in yourselves that needs to change, and you had the courage to admit it. The session began not with lectures, but with questions. Maya asked the group what fairness looked like at 30,000 feet, what dignity meant in the language of service, what silence meant when someone nearby was being humiliated, and no one spoke up. The room didn't answer quickly, but as the morning unfolded, stories emerged. Mistakes confessed, biases recognized, defensive instincts replaced by reflective honesty. And then, just before the lunch break, Maya opened the floor to those who wished to speak. Kylie raised her hand. She stood slowly, her voice low but steady. "I never thought I'd be here," she said. "I used to think people like me were the ones who got to teach, who set the tone, who showed others what it meant to be professional. But after that flight, I realized I had no idea what real professionalism was. I thought I was just following protocol, smiling when I needed to, being efficient. But I was wrong. I didn't see you, Dr. Langston. Not really. I saw what I assumed you were. And when I laughed, when I ignored you, I wasn't doing my job. I was failing it. I thought people like me were the ones who taught others how to behave. But I came here because I need to learn how to be a person worth following again." The room was silent. Maya didn't interrupt. She let Kylie's words settle, not into shame, but into clarity. Then she nodded once and said, "That's the beginning." Kylie sat down, and someone beside her reached over and gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. No applause, no ceremony, just breath and weight, and the unmistakable shift that happens when someone lays their pride down in favor of truth. By the end of the day, Maya distributed a single page to each participant. It wasn't a certificate. It was a personal commitment form, 5 lines, no branding, no logos. Just a place for a signature under the words, "I will not forget what I didn't see." Kylie signed hers slowly, then folded it and placed it in her uniform pocket. As the group exited the auditorium in quiet conversation, Maya stayed behind. She walked to the windows, looked out over the runway in the distance, and allowed herself a single deep breath. This wasn't justice born from revenge. This was change built from consequence. And for the first time since Flight 314, the air felt light again. If this story moved you or made you think differently, consider subscribing for more narratives that challenge assumptions and speak to justice, redemption, and power revealed. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the silence in the cabin, or the way everything changed at the stairs? Let us know what you felt in the comments. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to see how far this story travels.